Namaste, shalom, and welcome to What Moves Us, a very special program that is hosted by the Hindu American Foundation in partnership with Stand With Us, and this is in honor of Women's History Month. I'm Carly Gamble. I'm the director of the Stand With Us Center for Combating Anti-Semitism. I also serve in the Stand With Us Side-Off Legal Department as Counsel for Litigation Strategy. We have with us this evening four very special and prominent women, two Hindu and two Jewish, and we're going to be discussing with them how they have been inspired by ancient teachings and by the women who have come before them. We're going to also be discussing with them some of the modern day challenges of media misrepresentation and as well as their concerns about passing on spiritual legacies to the next generation. So again, I'm so grateful and I thank you for joining us for what we expect is going to be a really special presentation. I think you're in for a treat. I want to let you know that there will be an opportunity for question and answer, and that will come at the end of the program. And so, as I said at the outset, in the meantime, I'm going to ask that everyone keep themselves muted. And the way that we'll do the Q&A is at whatever point a question occurs to you, please feel free to go ahead and put that in the chat. And then at the end, we'll go through those and we'll try to get to all of them. I know there are a number of attendees, and so we'll do the best that we can. And hopefully the questions that we do get to, we'll just continue to round out the experience this evening. So first, it is my pleasure to welcome and to introduce to you Jennifer Rajkumar. She made history as the first South Asian American woman ever to be elected to a state office in New York. So welcome, Jennifer. Let me tell you just a little bit about her, and then I'm going to let her share with you about her experiences. Jennifer's a civil rights attorney and a former district leader with a background working in government. She served as the state's Director of Immigration Affairs and as special counsel from 2017 to 2019. She's on the board of Represent Women, on the Legal Advisory Council for Sanctuary for Families, and she's a member of a number of other organizations for social change. She also taught as a professor at CUNY's Lehman College. Jennifer was born and raised in New York, the first generation American in her family. Her parents immigrated to the United States with just $300 in a suitcase, settling in Queens. With early roots in public service and giving back, Jennifer graduated from Stanford Law School with distinction for her pro bono legal work on behalf of vulnerable individuals. She graduated from the University of Pennsylvania, magna cum laude, Phi Beta Kappa, where she received the Alice Paul Award for exemplary service to women and families. So once again, we are just so pleased to have you here with us, Jennifer. And I want to just dive right in. And I wanted to say, I know with you being a groundbreaker and not really a clear model to follow, you had to have found inspiration and must continue to do so in your heritage and in the Hindu and Indian women who paved your path. So I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit about those inspirational women.
Thank you so much, Carly, for the excellent question. Namaste to all, shalom, and happy International Women's Day. I want to thank the Hindu American Foundation and Stand With Us for bringing together the Hindu and Jewish communities tonight. Our two communities are natural partners and allies in this world. I am proud to appear before you today as the first Indian American woman and the first Hindu American ever elected to New York State office. But I know I certainly will not be the last one. When I ran for this seat in 2020 against a man who had been there many years, people told me, "You're a nice girl, but you have no shot." But we won. Not only did we won by the largest margin of any challenger in the entire state. In my journey to become the first Indian American woman ever elected to state office here, as Carly said, there is no guidebook. When you are a pioneer, there is no beaten path to follow. When you attempt something that has never been done before, you walk that path alone. However, I had as my guide my strong Hindu faith. So on this International Women's Day, I am proud to tell you that when I am searching for the strength to compete, I draw upon my inner Kali. I tap into that inner Kali, putting the intimidating task in Goddess Kali's hand. There are many Hindu women here tonight, and I know that all of you know exactly what I mean. I went to the mandir and I bowed down to the goddess Durga. She showered me with her blessings, and I truly believe that is how I made history. On this International Women's Day, I'm proud to say I come from a long line of strong Hindu women. My grandmother's name was Savitri, a person in Hindu mythology known for her wit and love. My mother's name is Urmil, named after Urmila, a heroine from the Ramayana. I am the first in my family born in the United States, and my name is Jennifer. Jennifer, by the way, is now also known in New York as a strong Hindu name. But when I was growing up, my brothers sometimes called me Sita. As a college student, I traced depictions of Goddess Durga throughout history. I learned that she was the form of God that could conquer demons. I was always inspired by the devotion of Parvati, who pursued Shiva until he fell in love with her. And I grew up learning about Draupadi. When evil men tried to disrobe her, she prayed to Lord Krishna, and her sari became never-ending, an endless cloth. From this, I took that if you have faith and a loving heart, that will see you through anything. Like Draupadi, as a woman, you have within you the power that can ultimately conquer any of the bad guys. During my journey, I must say that my Indian aunties were always supportive. Not only did they believe in me, but they became politically involved themselves, showing themselves to be a powerful force. I also carry with me the Hindu teachings of my parents. I meditate every day by saying the Sanskrit words of the Gayatri Mantra. And I focused because my dad always told me to focus, like Arjuna in the Mahabharata. He always told me the story of the Pandav brothers, who all tried to shoot a bird with their bows and arrows, but only Arjuna was successful. Why? Because he saw only the eye of the bird. So every day, I tried to focus only on the eye of the bird. My dad always told me in the Ramayana, Ram could not defeat Ravan alone. He needed friends and allies like Hanuman and the army of monkeys and bears. Learning from this, I seek friends and allies because only together can we make real change. But most of all, I have always been touched by the deep tolerance and love embedded in our Hindu faith. As a Hindu American, I was always taught that God is Om, and that Om can take many forms. God can be Krishna, God can be Lakshmi, God can be Ganesha. God can also take the form of Jesus. God can take the form of Allah. As a Hindu, I adopt other faiths as my own. As a Hindu, if anyone comes from my Jewish, Muslim, Christian brothers and sisters, they will have to get through me first because I love them like myself. In my race for the state legislature, I won across all demographics, ethnicities, and faiths. And part of the reason is that as a Hindu, I love other faiths like my own. This year, I stood out as the only non-Jewish legislator to speak on the Holocaust Remembrance Day on the floor of the State Assembly, a fact that was actually covered by Jewish newspapers. I've also actively spoken out against anti-Semitism, standing with the Jewish community like it's my own. And to my mind, that is exactly the Hindu thing to do. That is all part of the openness, love, and tolerance embedded in our Hindu faith. That's who we are. In fact, I remember when running for office, I fondly remember meeting Jewish families who told me, you seem a lot like us with your emphasis on education and family. That I am not the only American inspired by Hindu principles of love, tolerance, and nonviolence. Martin Luther King Jr., one of our country's greatest civil rights heroes, writing his letter from a Birmingham jail, showed a deep influence from Gandhi and Hindu philosophy. And he even said that India's Gandhi was his guiding light in his technique of nonviolent social change. And America's very first civil disobedience movement, decades after Martin Luther King, also employed nonviolent tactics. And that civil disobedience movement was the American women's suffrage movement led by Alice Paul. She was arrested for campaigning for the right of American women to vote. She was imprisoned and from prison launched a hunger strike, refusing to eat until votes for women were granted. And her nonviolent resistance, much in the style of Gandhi, pressured government leaders to pass the 19th Amendment to the Constitution, granting American women the right to vote. And as we all know, American women have now been voting for exactly 101 years. So I would like to propose that as Hindu Americans, we contribute our beautiful dharmic light to the country and spread our dharmic light, including the love, tolerance, and belief in service embedded in our faith. Hindu Americans have so much to offer. Happy International Women's Day to all. Om Shanti Om. May there be peace in the world. God bless America and all the strong women all around the world. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. And I have no doubt that with women like you paving the way, that you will not, in fact, be the last Hindu American woman in a role like yours. So we are so grateful that you joined us this evening. Before Mazi Philip was sworn in as a New York Assemblywoman in District 10, she and her family fled persecution in war-torn Ethiopia. When she was 12 years old, her family and she were fleeing religious persecution and became part of a miraculous airlift during which Israel covertly rescued 14,000 Ethiopian Jews and brought them to Israel before enemy armies were alerted to the escape. She went to school in Israel and later was accepted to the elite paratrooper unit. At university, she met her husband, and the two of them and their children moved to the United States in 2005. Today, Mazi Philip holds public office on Long Island and is the mother of 7, including twins born right before Election Day. Mazi, we welcome you this evening, and I have a couple of questions for you. First, I just want to note, I know that you're no stranger to challenges. We just heard from Jennifer some of the challenges that she's faced, and I know that, like I said, you have encountered your own. And so I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit about the Jewish women in history or in your own personal past who inspired you in facing and overcoming some of those challenges.
Sure. Hello, everyone, and happy International Women's Day. Thank you for having me here today. Jennifer, your story, you are incredible and amazing, powerful woman. I'm very proud of you. So you already heard a little bit about me, about my background. The woman I inspired, or a person who inspired me throughout my life, is my grandmother, who passed away, unfortunately, last summer. She lived until 103 years. A strong lady who raised her kids alone because my grandfather passed away in early age. In a village, she successfully raised my uncle and my aunts and my father. She always told us about Israel, about Jerusalem, and that we should always be proud being Jews, and that we should never forget one day we will end up going to Israel. She used to take us every night at the village outside to pray for miracle. I remember her at 9 years old going out asking for God to one day to really to bring all of us to Israel. And that miracle took place in 1991, as you heard, when my family and I came to Israel. So she is my strongest woman who helped me to be who I am. Life coming from a third world country to a modern society country like Israel wasn't easy. Being a person of color wasn't easy. Coming with no even language, to communicate with the rest of the people, it wasn't easy. I remember myself when I went to the class for the first time in my life. I was the only Ethiopian little girl in that class, and I stayed focused. I stayed focused not to cry. I saw the opportunity in front of me. And very quick, I made friends and I finished my high school. And then when I joined also the Israeli army as a paratrooper, I was only, Ethiopian Israeli in that unit. Again, I don't let the fear to bother me. I try to stay focused, stay positive, and work hard. This is what I did when I served the Israeli army about a year and 9 months. I remember those years to be the best years of my life as a woman. I remember when I came to my dad, I told him, Dad, I'm 18 years old, I need to serve the Israeli army. He looked at me and he said, listen, you're too little, too skinny, you my little girl, how come you're gonna go to Israeli army? I'm not allowing it. And I stand in front of him and I said, Dad, I'm gonna serve, I'm gonna go to the Israeli army. That's the way we're doing it. And he was shocked, he couldn't believe. He said, you know what, if this is what you want, go ahead. And when I came back after training, after 3 weeks training with the uniform and the weapon and the gun, he was a proud father to see that little girl from the village of Ethiopia standing in front of him now, an Israeli soldier. That was a very special moment for me and for him. And then, moving from Israel to US, again, as a second time to be new immigrant, it was not easy. All of a sudden, I'm in a big city, like New York. I have to adjust to the culture, learn the language. And I just, as I said, I always had the faith to believe in myself, faith that God is with me. And also, I'm a hard worker. When I decided to run for office, I'm sorry, my daughter just walked in. Hold on, okay?
Is everything okay? I think you're
a mother of 7 kids. My daughter decided to walk in to ask a paper. Okay, guys, are you good? Sorry about this. When I decided to run for office, in District 10, where I live, is a very democratic town. Nobody ever won in this seat as a legislator in the last 28 years. And when I said I'm going to run, some people said, there's no chance, you cannot do it. Nobody did it before you, how come you will do it? And having 5 kids, and I was pregnant with twins. And I said, guys, I'm going to do it. Just help me and we will make history. And I told them, I'm not here to cry. I'm here to work hard and to bring victory. So I was very happy. We split the seats and we won in this election. So my message to women around there who are listening to me is really stay positive, think positive, see the opportunity, work hard, and you can do whatever you want in life. So thank you for having me. Thank you for the opportunity. And I'm sorry that my daughter just jumped in.
You know what? This entire event is about women making history, and your daughter is no stranger now. She's part of that, and certainly with a mother like you, like I said, I have no doubt that you will be forging ahead and leading the path for children like your daughter. So Jennifer and Mazi, thank you so much for inspiring us with your stories. At this time, I have the distinct pleasure to introduce to you 2 women who have forged not only a greater understanding between Hindu and Jewish communities, but also a deep and what I believe is an abiding personal friendship. And I just want to say that it has been a pleasure just to have a little bit of an outsider's view for what's happening in that regard. First, Peggy Shapiro is the National Director of Special Projects for Stand With Us. which is an educational organization operating on 5 continents, whose mission it is to counter misinformation about Israel and to fight anti-Semitism. Suhag Shukla is co-founder and the executive director of the Hindu American Foundation. HAF educates the public about Hinduism and advocates for policies for the well-being of Hindus and all people and the planet. Peggy and Suhag's work together is a lesson of how what's most important is not what divides the Hindu and Jewish communities, but far more important is what unites them. So Peggy and Suhag, I just want to say thank you. I know you're both passionate advocates, and I want to ask you if you would take the next portion of this time together and tell us about the women in your own heritages who have inspired you and who have given you the strength to persevere against challenges, and also, tell us about those challenges and what it is you're doing to address those things, and what your words of wisdom are for us.
Thank you, Carly. Thank you, Jennifer and Mazi. Thank you, Asaf, who behind the scenes is making all the technology possible. I was trying to think of which women inspire me. It was very difficult to narrow down the list. And tonight I'm adding 2 more women to that list to make it even more challenging. And Mazi and Jennifer, just amazing. So Asaf, if you want to show slide 2. So there are a great many women in our biblical history, and they possess unique character traits, strengths, ability. But we hear a common thread, and we've heard it tonight too. All these women use their virtues to impact the future generations, either directly in confrontation or subtle determination. And they have the wherewithal to carry out what they know is right. So I'm going to talk very briefly about 4 women. The first is Miriam. Miriam in the Bible, she witnessed terrible tragedies of the Jews in Egyptian slavery, and the decree that the firstborn son will be killed, but she doesn't get caught up in the despair, which was the here now, but she clings to her own vision, and she's going to maintain this nation and her family, whatever is possible. And so it's her wisdom. She saved the baby Moses, who later became our greatest teacher. She placed him in a basket to float down a river. You would think that you'd be really nervous about something like that. Yet she stood by the bushes and watched over him. Her conviction was unshakable. They couldn't tell. And she infused her generation with faith and trust. And so when I turn on the news, and it's bad, and often it is, and some overwhelming, I look at Miriam for a broader view and to get some of her optimism. And then there's beautiful Esther, the story we're going to read soon in the Festival of Purim. It takes place in Persia, modern day Iran. She's a simple girl. She's an orphan raised by her uncle Mordecai, and she had no interest in assuming a position of royalty, but she was pushed into a royal beauty contest. She won. She became one of the queens of the very powerful and erratic king. And her uncle overheard that someone was planning in the king's household the genocide of the Jewish people. And he went to Esther and he told her what was going on and asked her to speak up, but she hesitated. And then he said, well, you may have been born for just such a moment as this. She took on the mission. She became the initiator, the active leader, the decision maker, the commander. She showed courage and wisdom, and she averted the dangerous plan and saved her people. So from Esther, I learned that sometimes, despite fear or lack of confidence, I know I have to have a mission. maybe I was born for a time just as this. And one of my favorites is Devora. And we remember this thousands of years ago in patriarchal societies. And here's a woman who was a prophet, teacher, orator, scholar, judge, general, national leader. In fact, she was the national leader for the Jewish people for 40 years, during which time the country was at peace. Devora shows that all options are completely available to a woman if she's up for the job. And then there's another Miriam, my mother. She's a Holocaust survivor. When she was 12, the Nazis took over her town. When she was 14, she was sent to a slave labor concentration camp. She lost everything: her childhood, her home, her family. Yet, she was always an optimist. I didn't understand, but I was inspired by it. She believed in the goodness of human beings. And that was a powerful lesson. And in our household, she said there is no room for self-pity in her life or anybody else's life. So today I strive to follow that and not make any room for self-pity, no matter how my difficult circumstances in my life. So those are 4 special women in my tradition. Suhag, I know that you have some very unique women and important women in your life.
Thanks for sharing those incredible stories of faith and resilience, Peggy. And thank you, Carly, Mazi, and Jennifer for also sharing with us and celebrating International Women's Day. If I were to channel my mom, every Mother's Day, when I said Happy Mother's Day, she said every day should be Mother's Day. So I will channel her spirit and say every day should be International Women's Day. But I start tonight with this striking image, and the artist is Chandani Mishra, a young, talented woman in India. And this is Ardhanarishwar. And for those of you who may not be familiar with Hindu teachings or the Hindu tradition, we believe that the one divine manifests in a multitude of forms. So here we see the blue side of the image is Shiva, the god of protection and transformation. And then the orange and yellow with the sari covering the head is Parvati, the goddess of power, nourishment, and harmony. And they're depicted as one, 2 equal halves of one whole. And this image captures, I wake up to this image every day. I bought the painting because I saw it online and fell in love with it. But it captures the heart of Hindu teachings and a Hindu approach to human flourishing. The tradition holds that the divine is both feminine and masculine, and it also transcends both. So in the transcendental or mundane plane, the masculine and feminine principles are viewed as complementary and not in competition with one another. So how does that translate in our lives? It means that we can channel all that's good in the feminine and all that's good in the masculine, regardless of how we might present outwardly. And by doing this, this brings about what's called rhythm, or the eternal universal balance, and it supports our ability to flourish or experience wholeness. And oftentimes what I've found is in the fight for women's right, that we oftentimes hear a lot of demonizing of men. But through this Hindu lens of valuing the good in both, I'm deeply inspired. My work is inspired, and my approach in life is inspired by this idea of balance and bringing goodness out. Next slide. I also want to talk a little bit about some Hindu teachers and trailblazers. The tradition, as I said, describes masculine and feminine principles as embodied through various gods and goddesses, in humans, and even in the natural world. So the masculine principles, we're talking about things like preservation or transformation and dissolution. And we learn about the feminine principles through stories of our goddesses. So the first goddess that you see is Goddess Durga, the mother goddess. And her stories embody fierceness, determination, and compassion. Next, we have Lakshmi, the goddess of prosperity. And she embodies strength, abundance, and generosity. And Saraswati, the goddess of knowledge, the third image, she embodies intelligence, creativity, and beauty. Now, there's all of these, of course, are values and principles that I seek to bring forth in my work in championing the rights of Hindus and other minorities, or in educating the public about Hinduism and Hindus. The tradition also holds a number of legendary women, Hindu women that represent the unique ways in which women have inspired the collective Hindu imagination through their intelligence, grit, compassion, and courage. So I'm going to tell a story of Gargi Vachaknavi. She was a wise and pragmatic woman philosopher that we learn about in the sacred text called the Brihad Aranyaka Upanishad. Now, that Hinduism is a wisdom tradition. And what that means is that for us, the root cause of suffering is not evil per se, but ignorance. And so we have a long tradition of philosophical debates and discussions on things like the source of existence or the nature of reality. So this is where we learn about Gargi. In this ancient court of King Janak, the king calls for a philosophical debate on the source of existence and the nature of reality. And he offers 1,000 cows and a bunch of gold coins to the sage or the individual who can prove to be the wisest in the kingdom. So there's a sage, Yagnavalkya, and he steps forward and says, you can just hand the cows and the coins over to me. I am the wisest. And before he's getting ready to leave, a number of other sages stand up and say, wait, hold up. You need to prove that you're the wisest. And how do you prove that you're the wisest? You engage in debate and you answer some questions. And Gargi is amongst these sages. So all of the sages that stepped forward start asking questions, and they're very quickly defeated in this debate by the learned sage Yagnavalkya. Then Gargi steps forward, and Gargi starts asking a series of questions that become clear that they're an effort to get to more subtler and subtler answers, and they're guiding the sage to reveal the ultimate answer, and that is that Brahman is the ultimate underlying reality and source of existence. Now, she keeps asking these questions almost like rapid fire. And as an attorney, I can just imagine that she was probably asking it like a cross-examination that you might see on Law and Order. And then all of a sudden, the sage gets angry and he says, enough already. No more questions. Your head will fall off if you ask one more. So essentially, he tries to shame her into silence. And so she gets quiet. Well, then a senior sage comes forward. And he intervenes, and he reminds the sage Yagnavalkya that, remember, we had come across another wise woman who had educated us on something deep and esoteric, almost acknowledging and maybe trying to provide some sort of comfort to Gargi. And then this other senior sage begins to engage in debate, and sage Yagnavalkya defeats him as well. There's been enough time now for Gargi to recover. And this is probably what makes this one of my favorite stories and why Gargi is such an inspiration to me. She turns the tables in a consummately feminine way. She turns to the assembly, not to the learned sage, and says, gentlemen, I am going to now serve as a judge, and I'm going to ask two questions so that none of you can question that sage Yagnavalkya is the wisest in the kingdom and deserving of the treasure the king has offered. So in one fell swoop, she's crowned herself judge and has presented herself as his champion as opposed to his opponent. Also, what we learn as the reader is that to be a judge, you have to know the answers. And so she's showing in a subtle way that she knows how he needs to answer the questions. Otherwise, she wouldn't be fit to be a judge. So what are the two questions? She basically asks the same question that he threatened that her head would fall off, implying that he didn't really answer satisfactorily, and she knows that he has the capability and the capacity to do so. So she asks the question again. And remember, she said, I'm going to ask you two questions. And he answers, but not the full and complete answer. And so she says, okay, humble, with full humility that, yes, you've answered this, but I'm going to ask you one more question. And she repeats the question. Why? Maybe because third time's a charm. But really, she's kind of pushing and prodding him along to give the answer that she knows he has within him. And from this, we get the core teaching of this text that each one of us, every living thing, embodies a divine spark or Atma, which is a microcosm of the macrocosm Brahman, which is the ultimate reality. So Gargi shows mastery not only in the subject matter, but how to navigate around ego and pride in an artful, intelligent manner and to achieve your goal. And I find that deeply inspiring and skills that come in very handy in the world of advocacy. I also want to bring up Jhansi Ki Rani, who is the last image on this slide. Now, Jhansi Ki Rani, or her name was Lakshmi Bai, or the Queen of Jhansi, is probably a nickname that every outspoken and daring Indian woman gains or earns. And so present company is not excluded. This was my nickname growing up. And so Lakshmi Bai was a queen in the late 1800s, mid to late 1800s, where she fought the British Empire, and she died in battle. I don't want to spend too much time in going over her story, and you can look it up. There's mini series, there are storybooks, there's all sorts of resources to that explain her story. But what's important about her is that she lives not only in the imaginations of Indians and Hindus, but she's physically memorialized throughout India. You will find at roundabouts statues that are made of iron in which she's riding a horse, and the horse is rearing up on its back hind legs, and she has a sword in her hand. And so she is seen as a symbol of courage and strength and perseverance, and a person that so many of us look up to. Next slide. So these women are just a few amongst countless legends. But you don't have to be a legend to be legendary. And in that sense, I have really been blessed by so many trailblazers in my inner circle. I'll start with my mom and my aunt, who's no longer here, but they both grew up in a small village in India. And my grandfather, who was a freedom fighter, saw education as the most important gift that he could give to his children. And in spite people in the village saying, no, you shouldn't send away your daughters to a city that was at least 5 to 6 hours away back then to pursue their college degrees, he ignored them and he said, no, I'm going to. So they ended up becoming two of the first women in their village to pursue higher education outside of their town. These are two women who grew up balancing pots of water, going to the local lake in our village. And my mom was known for being able to balance two pots on her head and one at her hip carrying water. That's what she did growing up. And when she was raising me, she was programming computers, and my aunt did the same thing. So for these two women, the way in which they handled the sea change in their lives with grace and courage is something that makes even the minor changes that I see in my life that much more easy to deal with. My paternal grandmother, she was widowed at the age of 35, and she was left raising 5 children on her own, all under the age of 14. And she had adopted 2 children of her brother-in-law, who both my granduncle and grandaunt had passed away. She never lost hope. Her thirst for knowledge was never quenched. She was always learning, and she encouraged her children to do the same. And that became their ticket to move to America and make a better life for all of us. She handled major adversity with humility and with selflessness, and she always remained optimistic. And that's what I try to do. And I have some incredible sisters, some by chance and some by choice. They keep me grounded. They inspire me with their respective trailblazing. And I'd be remiss not to mention the men, fathers, uncles, brothers, husbands, sons, and friends that are pictured here and not pictured here, who have also been sources of inspiration, tough love, and support. So Peggy, you and I both have been fortunate to know some incredible women who've paved the paths before us, but the going hasn't always been easy. Sometimes the way Jewish women and Hindu women are perceived and presented distort who we are and make it harder for us as religious minorities in the US. Well, let's talk about that.
First, I loved learning from you, and at another point we have to talk about the divine spark, because that's a commonality. We have an important principle that each of us contains part of that divine spark, and I think people, when they find it in each other, understanding can help the world.
Absolutely.
But you've mentioned a few women. I've mentioned a few women. Asaf, if you could show slide 6. So, okay, here we have it. We have outstanding, heroic, complex, courageous Jewish women. But when you look at the media, the rule is if you're Jewish, you can't be too Jewish. Obviously, there are lots of Jewish founders in Hollywood, but the characters are Jewish in name only, but not practice. They're okay, somebody's agreeing with me. Their Judaism is used as a shtick. I think Jennifer will know that, a gimmick. It's a source of derision and jokes. So yeah, are there Jewish characters on screen? Of course. But for every Larry David, who's obviously Jewish, there's a Cheryl Hines, a non-Jewish spouse, a friend, a foil, if you will, to offset the Jewishness. And unless the storyline is about the Holocaust, Hollywood, that's the only time that Hollywood seems to be okay with the entire family being Jewish. So the Jewish characters, the women, also have to express a little moral disdain, psychological discomfort with their Jewishness. So here's a picture. I'm not a movie critic or TV critic, but this is The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, a very popular series. Obviously a Jewish family, every stereotype you want to imagine appears there. But it skewers anyone who wants to actually observe a tradition. There was no one that was disparaged more than a sister-in-law who converted to Judaism and took it seriously, and they looked at her as if she were ridiculous. So we have this disdain of really being Jewish. I mean, you could be gastrointestinal Jews, you can eat a corned beef sandwich, but not live the Jewish values that I mentioned just a little while ago. And if you show the next slide, what we see here are stereotypes. And it concerns me because motion picture, TV, they don't only reflect our bigotries and hatred, they reinforce them. It may be that a movie stereotypes helps form the attitudes and prejudices. And Hollywood uses the Jewish stereotypes, especially for women. And two that I'm going to look at are what I call stereotypes on steroids. The first one is the portrayal of the Jewish mother. And when if you do slide 7, the Jewish mother on screen is controlling, over-judgmental, no class, shrill, terrorizing her children. You see Woody Allen, this mother hovering over all of New York to terrorize him and follow him. There's a film, Meryl Streep, a famous and very good actress, in Prime, and she plays a suffocating mother who, although she's supposedly a therapist, she's a control freak. She threatens to cut off her son, and she's juxtaposed to the beautiful Uma Thurman, and we'll look at that in a moment. But you see what was the most loving, compassionate source of passing on, Judaism. The Jewish mother is portrayed as something that no one would want to be. And then if you look at the next slide, I call it the princess versus the Gentile goddess. And if there's one place in which Jewish women reign, it's in the Jewish American princess jokes. We are depicted as grasping, selfish, lazy, materialistic, manipulative. That's one of the early films, Marjorie Morningstar, starring Natalie Wood, and I love Natalie Wood. It's cemented some of the stereotypes now known to be the Jewish American princess. She was spoiled, whiny, marriage obsessed. There was another film that's very funny, Clueless, and it sort of revolutionized the Jewish American princess, setting up these cultural markers when we think of young Jewish women, perfectly groomed, a French manicure, a digitized and bottomless closet. Now, sometimes the stereotypes are funny, but stereotypes seem to dance in pairs. They don't appear in isolation. So for the Jewish woman, our stereotype serves to enhance or elevate this more Christian or Gentile beauty in this country. Again, in the film Prime with Meryl Streep, you see the beautiful Uma Thurman and Meryl Streep, who's not a bad-looking woman. She's dressed dumpy, although she's supposedly a professional woman in New York, unattractive, big glasses, bad hair, scratches her body. Another film, The Heartbreak Kid, the Jewish girl is whiny, unattractive, and she's offset by this blonde-haired, porcelain complexion alternative. You see the Mary Tyler Moore, so many, where there, if it's a competition between the girl who is Jewish and not Jewish, generally you know who's going to win. So where are the courageous Jewish women? The next slide, please. The complex characters who can comfort a child and lead a nation. Well, in films and modern media, they are running away from Jewish traditions and certainly religious practice. You see religiously observant Jews portrayed in an atmosphere that is stifling, and for women to escape, that's the noble route. The series Unorthodox, Shira Haas, and she's a magnificent actress. She leaves this rigid, emotionless, narrow world in which women are defined only by their ability to bear children, to find freedom in Berlin. I don't know, for a Jewish person, that's where I would go to find freedom. Then they have another series, My Unorthodox Life, and it's supposedly a reality series, and it offers really false and dangerous portrayals of observant Jews. The Orthodox Jewish, they don't seem to act independently as adults. We don't see women who choose and cherish their Jewish heritage and practice, who willingly accept and find beauty in the rituals and the depth of the philosophy and live in a complex structure. So this is a problem I see in modern media in the US. Some Israeli films are changing that around. And all I have to say is that hooray for the gorgeous Gal Gadot, who as an Israeli woman was portrayed very obviously Israeli, everyone knows who she is, and she was Wonder Woman. That sort of helped us a little bit, but there's still a long road to go in honestly and genuinely portraying Jewish women in the media. So how do you find it? I know Bollywood is huge, but how about here in the media here?
So I'll start with education. Thanks, Peg. I think I'm definitely going to be watching movies in a far more discerning manner than maybe I did previously. And just to add, kudos, because I think during Wonder Woman, she was 4 months pregnant from what I read. So talk about real Wonder Woman. But for Hinduism, I'm going to start with education and then transition to media, because the study or the academic study of Hinduism then ends up informing so much of what we see in the media. And Hinduism and India are still largely portrayed through a Western colonial lens. And so as early as 6th grade, American public school students are learning about Hinduism in a way that's largely disconnected from how it is as a lived reality. And the role of women, if it's mentioned at all, is described in terms of inferiority, misogyny, subjugation, exoticization, as superstitious, etc. One book even went as far as saying that Hinduism teaches that women are inferior to men. Now, I already went over what the Hindu tradition holds in terms of the very essence of God as being seen as both masculine and feminine. Now, that's not to say that in Indian society or any other society that there aren't challenges that women face. That's why there's so many women and men who are at the forefront of ensuring that women are treated with dignity and equality. But when that's the only image, that becomes a problem. What these textbooks don't mention, at least many of them, is the centrality of goddess worship in Hinduism. None of them talk about Gargi, who now all of you know the story, but a 6th grader may not, unless there's 6th graders watching today. You don't learn about key women from Hindu sacred texts like Sita and Draupadi, who Jennifer mentioned, Kunti and other powerful women that changed the direction of history. There's historic women like Jhansi ki Rani, who you've heard about. She's not covered in any of these textbooks. Neither are widely respected saints and poetesses whose poetry is still sung today as part of the devotional practices of Hinduism. Poets and sages like Andal or Laleshwari or Mirabai. And then we also get a picture of Hinduism that's frozen in time, as if it's a piece in a museum and it's not a living tradition. So we don't learn about modern Hindu women who broke barriers, who shattered ceilings, who made significant contributions in the modern era. Anandi Gopal Joshi was one of the first doctors trained in Western medicine. She actually trained right here in Philadelphia. And no one would know about her. Shakuntala Devi, who holds like the Guinness Book of World Records on the fastest calculation. She's known as a human calculator. You don't learn about her. Indira Gandhi, she was a woman before her times, a prime minister in an era when most world leaders were men, and thousands of others that we don't learn about. And so what we see in textbooks then bleeds over into the media. But in the media, we're kind of trapped between negative stereotypes and invisibility, but in a different sort of way. So where there are stories about women, they're generally negative. There's cherry-picked challenges that Hindu and other Indian women of different faiths may face in India. 60 Minutes is probably the most notorious in kind of highlighting these types of stories. So this story that Christina Amanpour, you can see the picture of her there, the screenshot. The story starts this way. In most of the world, Nisha Sharma would be considered quite a catch, young, pretty, intelligent, someone any young man would be proud to marry. Her only problem is she lives in India. This ends up being a story on dowry, but this is just one example. Now, this is not to say that this Nisha Sharma didn't face an issue and she overcame it. The problem is that in the absence of any other portrayals, this becomes the single story of Hindu women. And where there are stories about Indian women who might also happen to be Hindu, it's their Indianness that tends to be the emphasis and not their spiritual or religious identity. These things are slowly changing. We have women like Priyanka Chopra, Padma Lakshmi, and Mindy Kaling, who publicly identify, while they publicly identify as Indian and South Asian, and the Hindu identity may not be something that they carry up front and center, they are increasingly sharing about Hindu traditions. So for instance, Priyanka Chopra, when she married Nick Jonas, the Hindu wedding ceremony became things that people got to, around the world, got a peek into. She also celebrated the Hindu festival of Holi. It's where we throw colors upon each other, and it's a holiday of unity, celebrating unity and diversity and the arrival of spring. And she took some colors on the Jimmy Fallon show and talked about the festival and what it meant. Padma Lakshmi has also been posting more pictures on Instagram of Diwali. So it's definitely a welcome addition to the types of content that are out there that can present Hinduism and Hindus as they actually are, especially Hindu women. Mindy Kaling, in both her role in The Office and the Netflix series Never Have I Ever, she's definitely brought greater visibility to Hindu holidays and practices and traditions. Sometimes there is a risk of falling into stereotype traps because the genre is comedy, and it's not a documentary for the purpose of education. So there's opportunity to have more films and more shows where a Hindu identity is kind of brought front and center so that people can understand who we are, and that the media representations reflect real people. And then, there's Julia Roberts. There was one splash 10 years ago that she, said in some interview that she's a practicing Hindu, but we haven't really seen much else. But that would be a great opportunity for her to share, both as an ambassador of the tradition to educate the public and help dispel stereotypes, but also give a positive face to Hindu women. So, as mothers, we have a tremendous influence on our children and future generations, at least up to a certain age. But our steepest competition is media portrayals, right? It's the misrepresentation and the lack of representation. What choices will they make in light of pressure to reject their heritage, to redefine themselves, or to separate from identifying from a homeland security? I think it might be a good time to shift our focus a little bit to some of the challenges that really kind of are at the center of what inspires us, the misrepresentations we see, and what do we do with that? What's the impact, and what's the possibilities? Peggy?
So this is a big topic, and we have just a few minutes left because I'd love to give people an opportunity to ask questions. But it's one of the things that keeps me up at night. What do I'm not so concerned with my children, but my grandchildren. I have 4 wonderful, outstanding, brilliant, gorgeous grandchildren, and I'm not biased. But what is it when they hear about one world when they're at home, and there's a completely different version of what is Jewish, what's your connection to your ancestral homeland, what they go into classrooms or among their peers. And these negative images don't only affect people who are anti-Semites, they can be internalized by Jewish young people, and they are. And more than just a feeling, actually these negative images and the increasing demonization of Jews and the Jewish homeland, it's dangerous. Jewish students, about 50% of them in college hide their identities, according to a recent study by the Brandeis Center for Human Rights Under Law. They hide their identities. And the longer they're in college, the more they feel the need to hide their Jewish identities. So what are they learning in school that makes them want to hide who they are? And why, when we're a society that we're supposed to accept diversity, is it not okay to be Jewish as part of the broad range of diversity? And so it does concern me. And that's why I'm working with Stand With Us, because we have to educate our young people. I say that we're the 411 and the 911. You go to, if you want, first of all, you have to educate your kids about who they are early and often. You have to, that has to come from the home again and again. It's a very, and know where the resources are. And we have amazing resources available on every aspect, both historical and current events. And then we have to be the 911. We cannot send young people who generally come from fairly sheltered environments, say, okay, you go out in the world and you face on a college campus people who have been there for 12 years as freshmen and are sort of paid political operatives, and you face them in a really hostile battle. We have to be there providing them support for them to know their rights, to know where to turn. We have a hotline if there's an anti-Semitic incident. We have to be there to back them with the proactive and reactive information and skills that they need. So I'll turn it.
Yeah.
Turn it. No.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. And I know that we've talked about this. I mean, there's many challenges in terms of raising Hindu children as religious minorities, especially where, religion is so different from the predominant religion. It's non-proselytizing, non-exclusivist, non-binary, syncretic. There's incredible internal diversity. And it's a knowledge tradition, as I mentioned before, and an experience-based tradition as opposed to one that's based on belief and faith. So there's tremendous space to explore, but that can also lead to dilution and a sense of feeling overwhelmed. But the communities across the country, temples, parents within their homes are doing an incredible job of preserving and passing on the tradition. But we're seeing increasingly that once they get to college, they're facing similar challenges to what Jewish students are facing. This is just an image of something called the Hindutva Harassment Field Manual. And it's written by the very people who are entrusted with educating our children and supposedly keeping them safe on college campuses. It's written by professors professors from the University of Pennsylvania, from Georgetown, from Rutgers, and a couple of other schools. And I mean, it's nothing less than fear-mongering. They talk about, students who might hold elite Hindu ideas without defining what those are. and suggest that any students who hold such ideas, which are not defined, might be a danger to students who are Muslim or LGBTQ or feminist. So they're painting this picture of Hindus being dangerous, of being closed-minded, of being hateful, of hating people of other religious traditions without any sort of basis. They very routinely conflate politics in India with a Hindu identity here. We're talking about Hindu students are, 1, 2, or 3 generations removed from India, and to hold them responsible for whatever disagreements that they have with the government of India is absolutely unfair. Their role as educators is to teach children how to think and not what to think, and they're really failing in that. If you go to the glossary of this guide, it denies the existence of Hinduism as a religious tradition. It denies the existence of India prior to it being a nation state. It denies the historic and present day persecution of Hindus. And it defines caste discrimination as being rooted in Hindu teachings and practice, all of which are false. And these are supposed to be experts in these fields. So what we've been doing is educating parents about this. We've created a glossary, an anti-Hindu, Hinduphobia and anti-Hindu hate glossary that's available on our website, because oftentimes some of the things are pushed through under the guise of academic freedom, and they're using language and terminology or concepts that are deeply Hinduphobic, and people may not even recognize it as that. So these are the ways in which we're doing it. We also have trainings for parents. I think maybe what we could do now is, since we're running short on time, is turn to the audience for some questions, and so that we can engage in more conversation about this. And I'm sure this will be the first of many.
Yeah. So I just have to say one thing. When you presented the list of denials against Hindus, their connection, the ancient connections, their current history, you could have substituted the word Jewish. And it would have had equal meaning and equal validity. Denying 3,000 years of historical connection to a land, denying our position about, human rights and so on. So it's denying who we were and who we are, denying our histories in order to deny our destinies.
Yeah.
So Carly, I'll turn it over to you if you have questions there.
Thanks so much. Peggy, Suhag, that was just incredible. You're both just a wealth of knowledge. It was inspiring to hear about your personal journeys and the inspirations that have kind of girded you up. And we do have time for just a couple of questions. And so the first one that I have, I'm so glad, Jennifer, that you were able to stay with us, because it's actually for you. And it's based on the fact that that some Hindus still don't treat Dalits with respect. And so the question, kind of with that caveat and that background, says, some universities in the US have included a policy against caste as a ground for discrimination. And there's a kind of a commentary here that, isn't it strange that in 2022 in the United States we're discussing caste discrimination? And so I just wonder if you have any thoughts about that.
So it's an interesting question. So caste is not a part of Hinduism. Hinduism, as I said in my remarks, teaches respect for people of all backgrounds, all economic backgrounds. And so I think it's very suspect and bizarre that anyone is trying to talk about caste and put that into policy. We have to be very suspicious and careful of that, because a lot of that is rooted in Hinduphobia and kind of trying to purposely spin a negative narrative of Hinduism. But I think what's very good is that a lot of people in the United States don't yet know about Hinduism. So it has been a wonderful experience getting to tell people what our faith really is. And most people are very, very open to it. But what you brought up is definitely not at all a part of Hinduism.
Yeah.
We have to be very, very careful to guard against people that are trying to spread a false negative idea of what it is. I know
Right.
Suhag has been doing a lot of great work on this as well with HAF.
Right.
Has been taking the lead.
I
Thank
can just
you.
say, I've spent how many hours discussing these very biased caste designations. And Suhag, you know far more than I do, but I just remember speaking to a group of Hindu physicians, and one said he's in charge of hiring residents. And he said, he's never asked a resident, nor does he know what caste the resident had in India or his grandparents had. And now with these new regulations, he's going to have to ask people, what's your caste? He doesn't want to know. He never knew. And this puts a sort of a classification on people that he never wants to even think about.
Yeah.
I can just quickly address it since we've been working on this, but I think that the beauty of our civil rights laws are that they are broad, facially neutral, and generally applicable. What that means is that these broad categories provide a wide umbrella of protection for anyone who's discriminated against on the basis of their background. So whether it's race, whether it's national origin, ancestry, descent, all of those things. So if someone has faced what they believe is caste-based discrimination, then the current law protects against that. But by these college campuses adding a category without any understanding of what it is, and because of the entrenched stereotypes of it being associated with Indians and Hindus, we're essentially creating a policy that's going to discriminate against all people of Indian origin, regardless of their caste background, or whether they have one or whether they don't have one. And that's the problem with it.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And Jennifer, particularly, thank you for that clarification. I think that's really important for those of us who don't maybe have the background, and it struck me, Peggy mentioned a moment ago that some of the comments that Suhag was making, that she could have just substituted Jewish. And I see the parallel, and you mentioned that this entire idea really is based on a false narrative that is being pushed. And I know that that the same is true, and it's one of the primary issues in the fight against anti-Semitism. So the question itself, I think, lent itself to just a great opportunity to really respond with some clarification, and also to point out that similarity here, that the damage that false narratives can do. And Suhag, thank you for really highlighting some of the concerns around those policies. A couple of more questions here. One of the questions that we have here is about just how to educate older children about Hinduism. There being a concern that they are maybe more and more turning to atheism, or they're impressed by the media. So Suhag, I'll turn to you first on this one about how to educate older children about Hinduism.
I think the Bhagavad Gita is a beautiful source. It is a source of inspiration for Hindus and non-Hindus alike, because it's really a practical manual on how to lead a service-filled and purpose-driven life. How do you, work for the sake of working without having any attachment to its fruits? It means you bring your best, the best of your abilities to any task. Jennifer shared the story of single focused, of having, your eye on your goal. That's what the Gita offers. And I think that it's a wonderful text through which you can have conversations and really bring it home to your daily life. It's something that we started with our kids when they were younger, but we continue to have those conversations, whether it's struggles in school or, applying for jobs as they enter into their careers. We can always turn back to the Gita. And the beauty of that text is that every time you return to it, you take away something new from it, because it's it's just that all encompassing. So I would recommend reading the Gita together as a family.
Yeah, thank you so much. And in order to be respectful of everyone's time, we're going to have to end the question and answer session. And you know, I know it can be disappointing when you have questions and you want to get them in there. I look at it from the perspective of, again, we had 4 women with such powerful stories to tell and inspiration to offer. So thank you all for being here. Thank you, Jennifer, and thank you so much, Mazi. And I'm going to let Peggy and Suhad close it out.
So I want to just show there are resources available. We will both Hindu American organization and Stand With Us. We have what you need, just have to click on. We have hotlines, legal assistance. And I think tonight is step 1. It's the beginning of an important conversation, because I feel if we understand each other more and we act in unity, we will prevail, we'll be strong, and we'll be protecting our students and their future. So I think I would like to continue the conversation with more events, with everyone here, increase our audience, and know that in unity we'll find strength.
Absolutely. I just wanted to say thank you to all of you who attended tonight. Thank you to the team at Stand With Us, to Mazi, to Jennifer. We had such a great conversation today, and every conversation I'm learning something new. And there are so many shared values and shared challenges, and that's a very good place to start to achieve our goals and to ensure that all people are respected and that they're able to live their lives, bringing their whole selves to whatever they do. So thank you.
Happy International Women's Day.
Thank you all. Have a great evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.